Thank you very much. In order to place ourselves in the topics to be discussed, we will be talking about how to delay, or can we delay, resistance, talking about biology, evolution, and what we can do or not to put them off in time. Obviously, diagnosis and monitoring to work along with scientists, and understanding how we can generate resistances and what we can do in order to prevent them and improve on the matter. This is the resistant weeds graph. We've been talking about this in general, and this is how they have been progressing. We need to decelerate this. We have generated lots of information, adopted to a greater or lesser extent, but the curve has not been decelerated yet. Nor do we have checks to make this, to say this for sure, but this is what we feel is happening. There's much more information on these resistances and the persons who detected them, but we don't know if or what we can do. We will listen now to an agronomist with a master's from the University of Rosario, and he works in the topic of resistant management. He works for Bayer. He's a member of the insect-resistant group of the Association of Seed Producers in Argentina. Then we will listen to an independent researcher from CONICET. He's a specialized in resistance and genetics. He works for the School of Agronomy of the University of La Pampa. And the last speaker is an agronomist and has a master's degree, former INTA researcher, specializes in integrated management of weeds and complex management, works for companies, colleagues, and farmers, and he knows a lot about weed management. Germán. The floor is yours. Good afternoon. This is nap time, so let's try to pace up a little bit. I don't know if this question can be answered accurately. How and how much can we delay weed resistance? Although Esteban introduced me and I work for Bayer, I am not representing Bayer, but rather the Committee of Resistance for the Prevention, the weed resistance and prevention. And we have a discussion forum where we talk about the main common problems and what action to be taken jointly to mitigate this problem. We have three general objectives that have to do with communication, interinstitution communication. We were talking about the foundation of the REM and how REM gets together farmers and researchers, and we companies are part of that group as well. I'll talk about the efficiency of that group and also doing research. In Argentina, there's research being done. We found research going on, and we decided to contribute from our side. Why is it important for companies to understand the problem of resistance, because developing a product, having it approved and marketing it takes a long time, $300 million, and only one of the molecules that are being studied actually reaches the market. The only effective action mode in the field nowadays, what we have, was discovered back in the 90s, many years ago, but that research process halted for different technical and commercial issues having to do with glyphosate, with tolerant soybean, etc. And so all of this time has elapsed, and there's like a pothole in between, a number of molecules, then the void, and now again we are being able to say that there's some product that may be novelty as a herbicide. But in the meantime, we had to make do with what there was. Talking about research, and you always talk about institutional aspects and you never talk about outcomes. So I will try to talk about outcomes. We are working through the HRAM forum with different researchers, and we rely on company strengths, for example, a network for distribution, the capacity to collect seed samples of different species to do screenings. We are carrying out more screenings nowadays. We started in 2017, 18, but the screening of weeds allows us to see what's going on or what may go on in the near future. Always talking about resistances. And again, we bring all of our samples together, we deliver them to researchers, we finance the research protocol, and we try to publish the results. Some have been published in national journals of Asasir, and other international journals. So we try to generate the process, we drive it, and until it comes to an outcome. And that's how companies, farmers associations, and researchers talk about weeds and what to do. Screening tests are carried out in small pots. Each researcher has a different work style. Some use a camera, other ones use a backpack and these pots on the ground. But the idea is testing a large amount of biotypes. Not just say, oh, I found a biotype that has a different susceptibility to compared with the rest. And that's research, yes, but that biotype, let's say any grass, which is resistant, found a biotype, and does that have an impact on production, on weed management? Maybe not. Maybe as the weed will expand, yes. So the way to understand how the program grows is, this is coryza, and coryza has a high level of control. So there's coryzas that are not very susceptible, others that are highly susceptible, but the range of all these samples goes from 20% to 100%, major scattering of response to the herbicide. If we take this other one, it will be less. If we take the other one, say glyphosate, well, there's less variability now with glyphosate, but paraquat, less scattering, and glufosinate with higher scattering. So some herbicides are very clear as to their effect and how they expand, how the biotypes expand, manifesting different susceptibilities. So the broad answer or response of glufosinate has more susceptibility than paraquat, for example. That's what we can say. Now, one biotype, okay. What happens with 25 biotypes, 100 biotypes in 2 years' time? What would this herbicide do? What would that other herbicide do? See, there's scattering again. And we saw this before we stated the problem. But when we started talking, we saw that people in the University of the Litoral are already working on this. And so we saw this lower susceptibility. This is glyphosate, 2 years. This is HDD, and this is glufosinate. So see the answer, the response to glufosinate. Something got out of hand. And remember this, because I'll show you something else that we need to talk about. This is something we mentioned quite a bit this morning. Diversity, genetic variability, response variability. And this is Leucina indica in red. The ALS, topramazone, ACCAs, and others. In different herbicides, different levels of response with different levels of susceptibility. So within these ranges, you identify risks that may be taken or that are there already. And this is the last one, Lolium, with the same kind of approach. So I have this model. This implies more work, more data, and more in-depth studies. But what we want to see is this. We're trying to show that we are doing this kind of screening. This is our work. It's an intermediate screening. You can find resistance, excellent. You can have a network for alerts based on a professional information, and then you can do screening with a diagnosis based on control data, check data of the tougher species. So this is simply my way to show you what we companies are doing in association with researchers in HRAC. In connection with resistance in particular, and this is my last slide, we did an assessment with Daniel Tueca. This is just 1 year for hybrid apparatus, and there are 2 hormonal products here that were up to 100% without any variability as to control levels. So Daniel said, why don't we assess per plant? 7,500 plants, and I helped him out. But when we analyzed per plant, this is what we found. The variability hidden in averages is expressed when we take each plant individually, each plant having a different susceptibility to these 2 herbicides. Glufosinate, for example, that seemed so good before because it may be an excellent tool, but there's things that get out of hand. This is the first year, next year will be more, and so on and so forth. For me, this kind of approach gives us an alert. In some cases, there's nothing to be done. control levels are falling, like glyphosate, for example. Not much change from here to here. But where it seems that nothing's going on, actually there's plants that were not controlled or checked, or the control was less than 50% with certain herbicides. So this allows us to understand why preventive measures have to be taken proactively, not reactively. And if this is good, if you find it good, I am very happy, because this was a very difficult test or trial. Final comments in connection with what we have to do or not to do regarding resistance. We as a company see that resistance impact today is the most significant and costly challenge that farmers have. Despite the chemical management diversification, the problem persists. And this has a lot to do with diversification of chemical management. That's where the accent is, and not on the practices. And although there's new technologies to manage weeds, that's not enough to have an impact, to attain an impact. But, you know, that happy face, not so happy, grinning there, says that we can do better. In connection with positive aspects, there's awareness that integrated weed management is essential to mitigate resistance problems that evolve. The scientific knowledge is very broad. We are generating a lot of research. The curve has escalated thanks to a lot of people, but also thanks to scientists finding stuff everywhere. If you ignore the problem, maybe you'll convince yourself that it's not there. It doesn't exist. Here, researchers sternly studied the problem. They have a lot of basic information and knowledge, a lot of knowledge on weeds and plant biology. And then technology innovations, as we said, are not scalable, but they are growing, and that allows sustainability and efficiency. And all sectors in the chain need to participate actively in the search for solutions. This is all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Bueno, seguimos con la charla de Marcos y Ramón. Gracias, Germán.
Thank you, Germán. We will move on to the presentation by Ramón and Marcos. Thank you for calling us. It's my pleasure to be here at this panel with this team. How much can you delay resistance in wheat? We were asked by the REM group. I wouldn't have got myself alone in this field of thistles, and also how much you can delay them. This image I'm showing you here is a plot of the south of the province of Buenos Aires. The area is called Dorrego. In all the cases, it's fall before the wheat crops. That is 2007, 2020, and 2023. You can see the evolution of one of the weeds, which has been a pioneer worldwide and in Argentina. One of the weeds that has found resistance faster in that evolutionary process. In 2007, we didn't see too much. It was a bit of a problem in 2020, and in 2023, it was a big problem with this image. Resistance undoubtedly is an evolutionary process, and the question is how far can we interact by delaying that evolutionary process from what we do for production. Along the presentations, we will talk about ryegrass and Amaranthus hybridus, another weed that goes fast in resistance evolution. If we want to make a model of how resistance evolves, thinking that in the y-axis we have the number of individual plants resistant in the population a long time, the response to how much and how we can delay resistance, as it has been said before, it's a good question. There are many weeds with different varietal behaviors, responses are different. The herbicide is also different, which may make the evolution different as well. But let's try and make some generalization that can take us closer to the response we want to get to. These are different models of the last few years, 2019, 23, 24, 22 from ryegrass to Johnson grass, and the answer is more or less this. This curve that we see here may be representative of the evolution in the number or share of resistant plants in a population a long time. This population is said to be resistant in many of these papers when in the field we see these failures in control. And it's been estimated that these failures in control appear when the number of resistant plants in the lot reaches 20%. When we have a 20% of resistant plants, we say that the farmer can detect that the control has failed and the population of plants is to be understood as resistant. Before getting there, what is the behavior of this curve? We can see that initially there is a lag phase which doesn't detach from zero, and all of a sudden you see that it starts moving away with this exponential answer that we see in the other period. These are the factors that we're going to talk about to explain how this evolution takes place, why it starts at a certain point in time, why at that point in time, not before nor after, and why that slope has a certain behavior rather than a smaller slope that would be more favorable in this aspect. So we have the initial frequency, what is the departing value that brings about this variability, which may have an impact on the selection pressure as well later. And the initial frequency of resistant plants, we have two ways here. The de novo resistance, and that is the resistance that takes place at a certain plot or population spontaneously. There is one mutation which makes one plant to have an insensitivity to a certain herbicide. That resistant plant is found in very low frequencies, 1 in 10 million, one found in ryegrass, or 100 or 1 billion, depending on the relevant species. That very low frequency will then increase year after year, and it's like the egg of the snake that will then support the selection. That resisting plant that we find in 10 million will be more easily found if we have a larger density of weed, and an important factor for the de novo resistance is the density of certain weed, certain population. If we think of ryegrass, 1 plant per square meter, we could find that de novo resistance. If we go along 10,000 hectares. But if the density is 0.1 plants per square meter, perhaps in 100,000 hectares, you will find a resistant plant. For de novo resistance, if we have a good weed management and trying to avoid a certain population of weeds to increase its density, it will be less frequent, meaning de novo resistance. The other issue which drives these resistance cases is novel resistance, something that catch your eye because they appear when that resistance is not common. And when these cases that have novel resistances have been found in those first alerts where the resistance to a herbicide is communicated, and at the time it was controlled in that population, and that is what has increased in that line. But not all the resistance issue is the variability created from scratch. The most of it appears, which gives origin to the initial frequency, which is the gene flow in a susceptible population is enriched by resistant individuals because resistant genes may come up through pollen. Let's say if a plant has a certain degree of allogamy, if it is mandatorily allogamy such as ryegrass, we have found that the capacity to have spontaneous crossings is 35 meters. A resistant plant can take resistant pollen to a sensitive mother within 35 meters. Under the conditions of our tests in Tres Arroyos. And so we found that there were 7 resistant plants every 100 seeds produced by the mother plant. That is a way for this initial frequency to increase with resistant plants. In other species, the distance may be larger, mediated by other factors, and perhaps it's not the most important, the most prevailing. The most prevailing must be, I guess, that our population is enriched with or through resistant individuals coming from seeds. What is the main vector that may bring resistant plants to our patch? They are here with different scales, thinking of the plot, their possibilities mediated by cattle, between patches by cattle, or between regions by cattle as well, or contaminated seeds, or the drills, something very common where we have found interesting results. Here in the south of the province of Buenos Aires, there were soybean plots with some amaranthus plants some 5 years ago. Amaranthus plants appeared that have survived glyphosate. We started looking at these resisting plants that were few and had come from 3 other plots in the south, and we found that these few plants had a triple mutation that had been communicated and reported in the center of the country. And in these 3 plots in the south of the province of Buenos Aires, wheat or oats implanted in the previous season had been harvested by machines coming from the center of Argentina. So seed transportation and ryegrass over crucifers that maybe in the reverse sense from the south to the north, it is a path that lets us increase that initial frequency. And those seeds are not just don't just have one resistance; they were quite picked where the problem has been there for many years, and suddenly you find in your plot that you have to start dealing with multiple resistances and maybe a response of insensitivity to, lack of susceptibility to more than one herbicide. This is the same region. A harvester coming into a plot contaminated with dropper-resistant brassica. So we find there that this weed suddenly, from one year to the other, is found in a plot which did not have any resistance up to that time. So you need to clean the machinery that is very toilsome, especially at the time of harvest, another thing to be done. But it can be an alternative, having the pattern that the harvester comes to the plot all the time through following the same path and starting the same sense, so that we can monitor with management in those first turns of the harvester. And if we need to engage in differentiated management with herbicide, we can focus those in that first entrance. If we repeat this every year, it can be an interesting alternative to manage initial resistance, which is a conditioning factor for when resistance starts to hike. And the harvester also takes us all over the plot, but initially it's one of the keys. The Barrow farm, in this last wheat campaign, a campaign was held to collect farmers' samples and look at wheat seed quality in the south of the province of Buenos Aires, together with the samples sent by the farmers. Out of those 80 samples collected, we started assessing the weeds that came in those 80 samples, and we found that out of these samples, 70% had some kind of weed. And the most complicated weeds that we found more often were ryegrass, first of all, Avena fatua, rapeseed, polygonum, and Hersfelda. When we looked at the number of ryegrass seed, we have found out of those 80 samples received, collected randomly by farmers and with a different sense, not looking for wheat, but looking at quality. Per kilogram of wheat produced under those conditions, there were 6 seeds of ryegrass. Many of them use these seeds for seeding the next year, so in many cases it's a major source of increase of that initial frequency of action.
Así podemos entender también cómo se va dispersando.
So these are the resistance evolution models in the region. The maps allow us to understand the vision of how resistance evolves, progresses in the network. Once the curve starts to rise, next is what it will do in the future, what the inclination of the curve will be, the tilting of the curve. And now I will ask Ramón Gigón to talk about different alternatives to manage the selection pressure. I thank the REM who invited us, and I also thank you because you're still here and not asleep. Very interesting presentations. Obviously, we need to keep working at the level of this frequency. The pressure is there, the resistance is there as well, and so we need to work on that selection pressure so as not to end up seeing those patches that mean less production, less money. Let us not forget that what we are doing is producing, not killing weeds. We want crops. We want to be profitable without weeds harming us in our efforts. Sometimes the producer, the farmer, does this on his own, and he goes crazy, hating weeds, and he gets emotional. That has nothing to do with producing, with farming. So let's try to handle those low pressures. The resistance is there already. Let's try to delay as much as possible the coming of that 20%. Because that will generate the patch that will cause us an economic and production hindrance. So we need to work on lowering the selection pressure. We need to apply less herbicide, fewer times. And we have heard the history of Rem, and Pablo and Daniel were talking about the use of glyphosate initially and the number of applications after 6 or 7 years when we started seeing the patches. Of course, there's going to be specific weeds where the frequency will be higher. For example, ryegrass, the initial resistance is high. We will need to live along with what we have, but it's difficult because our chip says no weeds whatsoever, fallow or not fallow. So there's a lot to be done, room for improvement there. And sometimes there are emergencies because we need to deliver the crops, and then all of a sudden we see a small weed emerging, and the farmer keeps applying even beyond the recommendation. That generates more selection pressure and sometimes even crop damage and some residues on the grains themselves. The idea is applying less and less, but every single time we apply, come close to the control value so as not to have selection pressure. The pressure means individuals that cannot be controlled, escape the chance of our control. We need to remember herbicides are old, already been in the market for a long time, but let's mix and work on the mixes, in particular with the use of pre-emergence herbicides. In Argentina, we don't have that much resistance in this cover, so mixing pre-emergence and try to use at least 2 different action modes when you apply a pre-emergent herbicide. Highly effective, but many times when it's very good, we use it on its own, like glyphosate, and a very good pre-emergent is left all by itself, again, because it works so well. But 6 or 7 years of one same product causes resistance. So when we use pre-emergents, try to use 2 of them, and of course, a part of that, chemistry, and maybe other things as well. But this is the most important part. Try to look for management, integrated management strategies. You know, every single talk says the same thing, but it is central. And try to rotate crops. That's the basis of an integral management. And here, each will look for his or her own alternative in order to interrupt seeding, progression, evolution, and also taking care of our soils. Remember, combining controls with tillage and also cover crops, because that helps to lower the amount of herbicide used. And, you know, a crop is the best herbicide. Competition of the crop with the weed will hurt the weed, and herbicides will work better. And also the architecture and density of the stand will help hurt that weed, harm it, lowering the selection pressure. And also rotating and perennial pastures. This is where we see right away the drop of resistences. We will see that. And a few other mechanical techniques like the seed destructor that may come in handy to delay resistance. Well, the idea was sharing a few of our experiences here in Argentina with two examples: ryegrass, winter weed, and amaranthus, summer weed. Two very complicated weeds, very complex weeds. Ryegrass, knowing the biology of the plant is very important. REM has done a great job grouping emergency flows. But see, this is a weed that is born in the fall, mostly. And yesterday we were talking about where the problem is, where ryegrass grows, emerges in February, and then we start using cleptodine and glyphosate, and that's where the selection pressure starts. So this is where we need to think apply less, all the way until we can seed, and control with some other kind of control using pre-emergence mixtures, which will help. Also using cover crops plus a chemical. This is suppression with the cover crop. In this case, it was barley and vetch and ryegrass. No competition for gray grass. This is a test in September with a cover crop and controlling the ryegrass without cover crop. This is the plant already grown and developed versus the control with ryegrass cover crop. So we were using the cover crop with and without control, and with glyphosate, same control, clethodim 2, but oxypop, haloxypop, for example, which depends more on the size of the weed. And without the cover crop, we could get this much control. But here, combining suppression and tiller being smaller, not so well developed, that would be a great tool, a tool that, a FOP we wouldn't have considered, but combined with another tool like a cover crop, it may be very positive. This is ryegrass, and this is ryegrass with cover crop. What else to say? It's very clear. Maybe add a pre-emergent vetch plus rye and see the amount of ryegrass there. Very competitive weed in fall, and what disappears is the vetch, basically. And this is the vetch plus rye cover crop and a little help from pyroxasulfone as pre-emergent. We release the ryegrass, and we end up with vetch plus rye. And then in June, July, vetch starts growing, generating that rug, so to speak, and we get this result. An example for amaranth with amaranthus with the knowledge of emergence flows. This is in the spring and summertime, Obviously, we need to think of this part, October, November, where we see a lot of emergence. And if we get started with PPO, applying in spring 2-3 applications of PPO, there will be resistance to PPO. So again, what we said about ryegrass, mix and apply less during fallow, in the fallow, but with other tools, residuals, for example, and post-emergence. Interesting. This is from Eduardo Cortés and Nacho de la Ferrer. It shows the effect of stubble on the emergence of ryegrass, and stubble plus herbicide. The same stubble generates a shadow, a shade on the emerging plants, and combined with cover crop plus herbicide, the control will be very good. With a herbicide that may not necessarily be the best for amaranthus, but combined with other practices, provides better controls. And this is how the emergence of amaranth goes down when there's a stubble, and very interesting info. And also how the amaranth plant changes its structure. I was talking about ryegrass, same thing with ryegrass. The plant looks for light, but there's a shade there, and so the plant structure changes, as in on the right, and these are plants that will be more sensitive to chemical control. An example, this is of that integrated management, which we do even not realizing when we integrate different practices for controlling. And residuals, I don't know how I'm doing time-wise. 3 minutes, okay. Residuals are really helping us out a lot, but not alone. And the positioning of the residual is very significant. That's why you have to control those emergence flows, both for amaranth and lolium. If we want to control all the lolium or amaranth births using pre-emergent at the very beginning, we won't come to having the weeds controlled, and we will have selection pressure. The herbicide will leave a few individuals here and there, and a part of the herbicide will be absorbed. Those plants will become tolerant or resistant to this herbicide.
Aplicando un herbicida.
This is a new herbicide, bixlozone, with a very strong against ryegrass, but a March application trying to control all the specimens we lost. March, April, May already did not catch so many new plants. We're looking at the tail of the new plants, and we should wait for a very good control. Careful where you apply the pre-emergent herbicide, and let's try to apply it so there's nothing left after the treatment. I don't know whether the concept was clear, but the selection pressure is generated when we apply it here. That 20% something absorbed, some herbicide has absorbed it, and these plants may be metabolizing the herbicide and have some degree of resistance. Mechanical control with herbicide, excessive size ryegrass, glyphosate, clitodime with duck feed, and the rotation of the crops is fundamental. We did this at Bordinabe. 10 years wheat over wheat, 10 years later look at the ryegrass and the plots. 5 years of wheat and 5 polyphytic pasture with cattle and grazing. You can see the population of ryegrass going down. And I believe that this type of rotation would be good. On top of amaranthus, rotation. Look at the amaranthus, very clear. It's with summer crops This is by Yannicari paper, and you see amaranthus. It's more frequent that where there's more soybean, corn, and cotton. If you have wheat, there's a little amaranthus. So let's rotate winter and summer crops. If we do winter, we will have ryegrass. If we do summer, we will have amaranthus, which is a summer plant. Grazing can be analyzed, ideally to have pasture, but it can be controlled with grazing on stubble. This is what we're doing with sheep on ryegrass. We have them there. This is grazing with sheep in fall, and glyphosate plus clidodine on the resprouting, the tender resprouting of that grass. And you can see it's green. We had a resprouting because in the root there were reserves and the plant resprouted. This is glypho plus clido, and 10 days later the sheep grazing, and 20 days later we don't see resprout. It was a dual hit. And we have not yet tasted the lamb, but the sheep ate the two herbicides. These things happen in science. There is a company that has added in Argentina see the structures. This is interesting, Redecon. Last year, we had a chance to have this that will be part of the integrated management. Olivar Franconi and Raimondino's team, they measured the effectiveness of the seed, the structure on amaranthus and soybean, and look at the emergence after going through the seed, the structure, the emergence, and the control and effectiveness of the structure is very high. So it does work. And I think that it is part of small actions we can adapt. Marcos will then share with us the conclusions, and we'll leave time for Q&A. We need to respond. How much you can delay resistance? In this model, in Lolium, from a Spanish team, they found that crop rotation delays resistance. It was some 3 years, and when you rotate crops, that 20% is reached at sort of 5 years. If it's added to other practices, maybe we don't use rotation alone, but adding action modes and seed that is weed-free, these times will be expanded more. It's not that we replace practices, but in an integrated fashion, you can have from 2 to 3 years to 9 years delayed resistance, combining these methodologies in this ryegrass group in Spain. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you to the three speakers. We do have 4 minutes for questions. 1 minute per answer, please. One of the first questions is pretty critical for what is going on today, and it is what you think about the selection pressure that may be created on 2,4-D in herbicide-resistant soybean. How can we delay resistance there? 1 minute, okay. Such as we were saying, if the selection pressure is only based on 2,4-D, resistance risks are there, and they are big, and I'm sure we'll see them in the next few years. But 2,4-D has a number of peculiarities vis-a-vis other herbicides. The physiological effect that drives to plant death is still being discussed. There seems to be not just one target. Even when it's one of the oldest herbicides, it's been used for so many years, and then after glyphosate is the most widely used, there are not too many resistance cases, so that is an advantage. But we know, however, that no herbicide is foolproof, and it needs to be combined with other strategies, as we said, with rotations and other modes of action, because maybe it may evolve into resistance as other cases. Two things apart from what you have said, about chemistry and the possibility of having a 2,4-D resistant crop. They have ammonium glufosinate resistance, and both are heavyweights. And using glufosinate mixed with 2,4-D, which is very good for amaranthus and small plants, or the dual hit technique in the crop will reduce the selection pressure with 2,4-D, and following with chemistry we have 2,4-D resistance, but we still use pre-emergence herbicides, because farmers used to rely on glyphosate alone, now 2,4-D, and the experience of 3 applications in less soybean to try and reduce the amaranthus. Let's use it as another tool. First pre-emergent herbicide, then 2,4-D will work better, and Glofo will work better. And there are few cases of glufosinate resistance. I believe that the dual hit will provide a more long-lasting tool. What can I say? Thank you. No, I agree with what my researcher colleagues are saying. There are several questions. I will choose the one that is the shortest, because they will kick us out of here. What is the next herbicide that may cause resistance in our system is? I'm not going to say the active ingredient or the commercial name, the trade name. I don't know, but we need to think of selective herbicides. They have more chances. Herbicides that have residual action have more chances of creating resistance, and herbicides that are used, that are highly frequent, not in combination with another alternative. So those that meet these conditions are the ones that we will find on this list in the next few years. To conclude, the more we use a herbicide, the more chances there are. We had glyphosate resistance in grain, and then we went to graminicides, and I think that the resistance will continue because we overdid it. In white leaf, when there is glypho resistance, we go with glypho and 2,4-D, and then we started using a lot of PPO, and there's a problem in the short term, resistance to PPO, even when there are a few cases in the frequent use of PPO. We went to HPPD, and there will be resistance to HPPD, especially in that group that we're working a lot with a new positioning of HPPD. It used to be for corn. Now we are using it for fallow, then for wheat, all year long with HPPD. And even when there are no cases as yet, there may be resistance to HPPD, and that is another risky group about which we're not talking as yet. I believe that it depends on us. Last message, hopeful as to the new products. Companies are aware of this and see that the new launches are typically combined products with 2 and even 3 different effective modes of action in the same target. So this cuts down risk. It's not the total solution. Chemical solutions are one leg to resistance management, but when you have a product in a combination coming from the provider, the possibility of selection is reduced a lot. We are over time, so we would like to thank the 3 speakers, all of you for being here, REM for organizing this panel. At 5, we will have a panel about resistant corn at the Spray Tech auditorium, and without your permission, for those who have questions, the colleagues here will be available for you to ask.